All right, thanking God the Father, the Son, and the Spirit for letting us get to the last of Paul's epistles to the churches, understanding that after this, we're going to see his epistles to two different ministers that he seems to have partnered with in his work, one of which seems to still be with him in his letter that he's writing to the Thessalonians, that being Timothy. Understanding that the next two epistles are going to be directed to Timothy, specifically at points at which Paul seems to have left him behind to do work in other areas. The other epistle that he's going to direct to an individual is going to be to Titus. But here in this epistle, the first of two he is going to direct to the Thessalonians. It's going to seem to wrap up letters that he writes to 7 churches, much like, as we have alluded to in the past, Jesus is going to direct John to write to 7 churches, not the same 7 churches, but the 7 churches of Asia, what was considered to be Asia at that time, I guess, or at least biblically it was considered to be Asia. But either way, one of the overlapping themes between the letters that Paul writes to 7 churches and the letters that Jesus directs to 7 churches is going to be the need to overcome. It's not the only theme that's going to come across in Jesus' letters to the 7 churches, but it's one that seems to overlap with Paul's letters in one way. He is going to seem to encourage the churches that he is writing to overcome deception, and not broad deception generally, but the deception that's linked to a simple principle: you reap what you sow. There seems to be a deception that's already at work in each of the churches he's writing to, that would tempt them to believe, going back to what we mentioned in Deuteronomy 29, that I can do things my way and claim all of the rewards that God has for me. And he seems to be cautioning low-key, and sometimes not so low-key, because he's literally going to repeat what Jesus said in terms of reaping what we sow in at least one of these epistles. But he is going to encourage them, whether it's low-key temptation or an overt temptation, to avoid straying from the realization that no matter what we claim to be, we will reap what we sow in the day of judgment. And one of the things that seems to set the letters to the Thessalonians apart from the others is the specific focus he makes on letting them know in each of the 5 chapters, at least in this first letter to the Thessalonians, that God is coming back, and he's coming back with a reward for those who find it in them to hold to everything he has asked them to do and simply endure to the end. God is going to say, we've been told he's going to say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." He's going to talk about low-key the need for, not the need for, but the way in which the Thessalonians seem to have distinguished themselves as thus far being a faithful example of what God is calling his people to be. And when God comes back, they can look forward to the reward for their endurance. But God's return also brings a judgment that he is going to mention in both the first and second letter to the Thessalonians. The first of which I want to look at through the theme of power and prep. Power, understanding that he is going to look at some things unique to the Thessalonians that suggest or give Paul confidence that God has good things planned for them, because he is going to see a demonstration of power in the Thessalonians, from God by way of the Holy Spirit, that gives him that confidence. And likewise, they're going to seem to have taken that same power and made a powerful example to the churches around them, and not just the churches around them. Paul's going to say they've been an example, at least in some areas, everywhere. But the preparation, once again, goes back to that whole concept of wanting them to be prepared to understand the signs of the end of the age, at least. Understanding that Jesus, when he talks about end times, he splits it up into 2 ends. One, the end of what seems to be the age in Jerusalem, leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in or about 70 AD, and then the end of all things. Paul seems to be giving them signs looking more specifically downrange toward the end of all things. But with that, in verse 1, Paul is going to say, Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy are writing to the Thessalonians. In verses 2 through 10, it's pretty much just a block paragraph in which he's going to divide it up into 2 sections. One, I guess verses 2 through 5, dealing with things that we, quite possibly Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy are encouraged by or have in mind with regard to the Thessalonians, and then things that you, the Thessalonians, have done that have made them what seems to be a healthy example at least up until this point. But he is going to start off by saying, we give thanks to God always for you, constantly mentioning you in our prayers and remembering before God their work of faith, their labor of love and steadfastness of hope. Going through, of course, I gotta slow down. Going back to that whole concept of the way in which they seem to have one component of finishing well down, and that is they have endurance. And so the endurance or the steadfastness that they have to this point is something he is going to encourage them to carry forward, understanding he is going to say that they, seeming to refer to himself, Silvanus, and Timothy, know that God has chosen them because the gospel came to them not only in word, but in power and in the Holy Spirit with full conviction. At which point, halfway through, or a portion of the way through verse 5, he is going to then shift to what they know. And they know that Paul came to them and proved the kind of character that they should possibly emulate. And for that reason, they did, in fact, become imitators of Paul. And more importantly, not just Paul, but as we have seen him tell other churches, be imitators of him as he imitates Christ. He's going to say, more importantly, they became imitators of God, understanding that they received the word in much affliction, but not simply content to be imitators of Paul. They seem to have done such a good job of taking seriously the work of the Lord that they actually became examples to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. For not only had the word sounded forth from them, but their faith has gone forth, as we mentioned, everywhere. So that it seems that they made Paul's job easy, because he's going to say so that we need not say anything. But amongst the things that they become known for, it's the way that they turned, or the degree to which they turned from idolatry to God. And it seems to be an extremely, of all the pivots that he might have asked in the different places that he preached, it seems to be one of the most significant pivots, because it's gotten the attention. Not only the fact that they made the pivot, but to the degree they have become faithful or maintained their loyalty to God. Understanding he's going to close the chapter out by saying to also wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. As we mentioned, seeming to point forward to the coming judgment that he is going to mention either overtly or low-key in every chapter of this letter. But the thing that might have most caught my attention is something I think I already mentioned, and that is his confidence seems to come in the power that has been demonstrated in the Thessalonians. And likewise, not content to just consume the power, it seems that they have taken the power that God has given them in the time that Paul and others, I guess, have been working there, and now they have become a powerful example, so much of an example that, once again, Paul has said so that we don't have to say a word. And in life, the one thing that brought to mind was times in life when I am trying to do something and there is someone who simply comes along and does the kinds of things that just make my job easier. And understanding the relief that comes with having people partner with you in that way, it drives me to want to likewise, as Paul seems to have seen in the Thessalonians, if I'm going to be a servant, as Paul has described himself, sometimes it's more than just my commitment to being a servant. It's more than just my commitment to being a servant that's important. It's what am I producing? And knowing what it's like to have relief that comes over you when, as we mentioned, people are working in a way that just makes your job easier. God willing, I want to be the kind of servant that makes life easier for those who are genuinely doing right. And so with that, as we often say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that God willing, as we begin to look more and more like the kinds of churches that seem to be exemplary, that we end up taking on the kinds of habits that make life easier for those genuinely at work for God, especially those who are suffering under the strain of working for God. Which is why we often say, God's best to you as you go forward with him.